Hey there, Emmanuel here from WebDevFuel, and in today's video we'll go over exactly how to create a new website with Astro. Now, if you're not familiar with Astro, it is essentially a way for us to build static websites that also allows us to essentially use JavaScript inside of our website, and instead of hydrating the entire page once the person goes ahead, visits your page, so instead of us having to hydrate our entire page, we simply go ahead and create what Astro calls islands, and we go ahead and hydrate each one of those islands. And in the end, what we'll be left with is a very easy way for us to build fast websites that also are interactive with JavaScript, and also we can go ahead and essentially use stuff like, let's say, React or Vue without having to simply attach stuff to the DOM. So in the past, we usually would go ahead, render a website with PHP, and then we would go ahead and simply attach JavaScript to all those DOM elements later with, let's say, jQuery or with vanilla JavaScript. But nowadays we want to be able to use all of our frameworks that we love to use, and they really help us with building simpler websites. But at the same time, we also want to be able to essentially have a fast website that doesn't have to hydrate the entire page. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and first of all create in here a new folder, and let's call this one Asteroid, for example. And then let's go ahead and cd into it, and I'm going to simply go ahead and initialize a new Git repository to make sure that I can then go ahead, commit all of these changes, and so you can then later access this Git repository, so you can go over all of the code if you're sort of confused. And now we want to go ahead and set up our project. And actually I made a mistake. Instead of creating the folder, so we can actually go back here. Let's go ahead and delete Asteroid. And the first thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and initialize the project. Now I'm already here inside of the Astro docs, but if you're not, I recommend that you go ahead, you also open this and you give this a read, so you can go over here. As you can see, we have a bunch of stuff that they give guides for us to essentially understand how to use Astro. And one of the first things, and actually the first thing that you're going to see here on top, is going to be getting started. Now this essentially allows us to scaffold a new project with Astro, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So instead of, you can actually go ahead, use here npm yarn. In this case, I'm at the moment using npm, and if you're not aware, it is essentially a way for us to not have to reinstall all of our node modules all over again inside each one of our projects. So it essentially creates a global folder, you can think of it like that, and then it reuses a lot of the dependencies without it sort of consuming a lot of space on your computer. But it is pretty much the same as npm, so you can also use npm or yarn if you'd like to. So let's go ahead and copy this command, and as you can see, it simply says pnpm create Astro and then latest. So we'll press here return, and then after all of these setups, as you can see, we have in here a message that reads, where would you like to create your new project? Now this essentially is our folder project, so we're going to again name this one Asteroid. And now the first thing that this says is, which template would you like to use? Now let's just go ahead and see here if this has any information about each one of these templates. And I'm not really sure. No, I don't really think this has a lot of information about it, but let's just go ahead and see here. So we have just the basics, which is the recommended, then we have a blog, a portfolio that it already comes with a lot of styles and things set up, then a documentation site and an empty project. But let's just keep with the basics. So we can go ahead and press enter. So we need to first of all again select that from the list. And then as you can see, this is now copying all of the project files. So what this essentially means is that this is going to go ahead, go to the Git repository, and then it is going to fetch all of our files that we need to create a new project. Now this asks here, would you like to install npm dependencies? So we're also going to say yes, because this is going to run the, let's say, the equivalent to npm install or yarn, just the yarn command. And now as you can see, this is installing all of the packages that we need, so we just need to wait a couple of seconds. And actually, while we're waiting for this, let's go ahead and search here for one thing, which is going to be one of the first things that we'll set up inside of our project. And we want to see here Tailwind. Now, one of the great things about Astro is that they provide a lot of integrations already pre-built sort of for us, so we only need to run one command and then we are able to use inside of our project. In this case, it is going to be Tailwind, which is the tool that we're going to be using to style our project. So let's just take a look here. So as you can see, the packages were installed, and now would you like to initialize a new Git repository? Also yes, because I went ahead previously and I forgot that I actually needed to run this command to create a folder, but we want to essentially create a new Git command, Git repository actually. And then would you like to set up TypeScript? Now we're going to go ahead and use TypeScript because I believe that especially when using with React, which we'll see in just a second, so when we set up our React components, it is much easier to use it once you want to move fast, you want to start building things without having to worry too much about stuff breaking. So when you do that, it is very, very helpful. And then also when you're consuming APIs, so we're also going to be using headless UI, which is basically a way for us to create new UI components from scratch without having actually to write them from scratch. So when using those external APIs, and then when we import those libraries into React, it is going to be much simpler for us to essentially go ahead and know exactly what we need to pass, all of the props, all of that kind of stuff. It is going to be much simpler with TypeScript, because with JavaScript you have the mental overhead of needing to essentially know everything that you need to pass, how the API is structured. But with TypeScript, that is going to essentially allow us to simplify that and to move much faster. So with that in mind, again, you simply need to move here this list, so with the up and down arrow, and then choose here the strict recommended, and now we are good to go. And now as you can see, it says that you already have our project created, so you can go ahead, navigate here into the project, and as you can see, we have here a couple of stuff. We have our Astro config file, we have our node modules, because again, we went ahead and created, installed here all of the dependencies. We then have our package.json, the npm lock, which is yarn lock or npm lock, same stuff. And then we have in here a couple of extra stuff, and I'm going to simply go ahead and open here our editor. So you can take a look. You can see in here we have our public folder, which is essentially where we're going to go ahead and place in here all of our static files, so let's say images and all of that kind of stuff. So as you can see, for now we have in here our favicon, and then we have in here inside a source folder, first of all, a component, which is a card component. And if you take a look at this, you can see here that this is .astro. Now what this means is that we can go ahead and create, so let's again take a look here inside of our documentation. And as you can see in here, if we take a look here at components, it says here framework component, so we don't want this one. Okay, so probably this one, yeah, exactly. So as you can see, we have in here components, which is Astro components are the basic building block of any Astro project. They're HTML only templating components with no client-side runtime. So what this essentially means is that we are able to create components not only using something like React, which we'll use in the future, to essentially be able to use libraries that are going to allow us to not have to build everything from scratch. But when we want to simply have HTML and we want to only, let's say, pass in, for example, like here, for example, a title, a description, something very static that usually doesn't change, and we don't have to want, and we actually don't need a lot of interactivity, in that case, we use here the Astro component. And as you can see, for now we have in here our card component. Then we also have in here our pages, which essentially means that we need to house in here all of our pages, and then this is going to be the path to the page. So in this case we have index. So if we go ahead and add in here, let's say another path, and then we added in here index.astro, this, when we navigated here to another path to our website, we would go ahead and see this, but we could also go ahead and do this. So another path.astro, and then when we navigated here, we would go ahead and see that page. Now let's just go ahead and take care of something. So I forgot to install the Astro language server, so I'm going to simply go ahead and search here for this. Now if you're using something like VS Code, you probably don't really need to install this, but I'm just going to go ahead and take a look at this here, and then I want to go ahead and install it globally, language server. And then I also want to go ahead and install here all of the let's say all of the syntax highlighting that we want to make sure that this works. So as you can see, I have in here Astro. So this is now compiling, so we now have syntax highlighting, and we also have our language server. So now let's just go ahead, restart this, and we still have an error. As you can see in here, request initialized failed with message, cannot find module, node modules, TypeScript. So let's go ahead, and we probably need to, so let's move in here. So we probably need to install in here TypeScript. So let's see if this goes ahead and removes the message, and we can use here our Astro language server. Now again, if you're using VS Code, this is just, you can go ahead and skip this part. If you're using something like Vim, NeoVim, or even Emacs, this might be helpful to you. So we need to go ahead and install also TypeScript as a dependency, as a development dependency. So now let's go ahead and try to see if this still complains. So now if we go in here and open, now we should be able to work with this file correctly. So now let's go ahead and take a look at this file. So as you can see, this page in here, which again is the index page, is going to have, first of all, here at the top a layout. Now I'm going to also go ahead and open here our layout and split this. And what this essentially means is, if you're familiar with something like React, this is exactly or almost exactly the same thing. We have in here a layout, and then we pass here inside of this HTML tag more HTML that we want to have inside of this layout, and then here inside of our layout Astro file, we simply need to pass in here a slot. Now this is more I said previously that this was similar to React, but this is actually more similar to something like Svelte or Vue, because we are passing essentially in here a slot tag instead of having something like, let's say inside of React we have something like children, and here we simply have our slot. So now what this essentially means again is that we're going to be able to create layouts, and then we can recreate them. So instead of having here a layout, we could go ahead and create a blog layout, a post layout, a layout only for categories. So all of that kind of stuff, we can then go ahead and structure our website in this way. Then as you can see, we have in here our main tag. So this is usually stuff that's very reminiscent of just HTML. But we also have in here our card. So like I said, we also have Astro components, and as you can see, we have in here a card. We pass in here href, the title and the body, and then we have in here using TypeScript an interface with the props, and then we grab here the href, the title and the body, and then we go ahead and add it here to our h2 tag, then to the p tag, the body, and then we also have in here a link with the href. Now continuing, we finally have in here, which is the style tag. Now let's again go ahead and move here to the Astro documentation, and let's go ahead and for example, styling and CSS. So exactly, so as you can see, we have all of this here inside our guides. And then, as you can see, it says here that Astro was designed to make styling and writing CSS a breeze. So we can write our own CSS inside of our Astro files by simply adding here a style tag. And then this is all going to be scoped to our components. So what this means is that all of this CSS in here is only going to be scoped to this part right here. So if we add an h1 tag inside of our code, so let's say inside of one of these components, so let's say that this card component had an h1 tag, so it actually has an h2 tag because that makes more sense in terms of HTML. But if it had an h1 tag, this style wouldn't affect this at all, because we are scoping essentially this to this thing right over here. And again, this is pretty similar to what happens when we're using Vue or Svelte. Okay, so this is pretty much everything that we need to know for now in terms of Astro. So now let's go ahead and start our development server so you can see exactly how our website works. So let's go ahead and navigate here to development, then to projects, and then here Astro. So now we are here inside of our Astro project, and we can go ahead and simply run our dev script. So now if we go ahead and take a look here, as you can see, we have a bunch of scripts. Now this beneath the surface is using Vite. So now if you're not familiar with Vite, let's just take a look here at its documentation. So this is essentially an alternative to Webpack. So what this essentially means is that we can use Vite not only to then take our JavaScript and essentially transpile it in order for the browser to understand it, but we'll also be able to now during development have a very easy to use development server. Now later, just to make sure that you understand, this is going to actually go ahead and simply create a bunch of different HTML files that we can serve statically. So usually what happens with something like Next.js is that we go ahead and we essentially start a server even in production. Now with Astro and using Vite again under the surface, this is not the case. This is simply going to create a bunch of different HTML files that we can then go ahead and serve with something like Nginx or even Caddy, which is what I'm going to show you in a later video, how to exactly deploy this website. So now with that in mind, let's go ahead and in here, again inside of our project folder, let's go ahead and start our development server. And now as you can see, this is running on port 3000 on localhost. So let's go ahead and take a look. And as you can see, this says here, welcome to Astro, and then we have here our card component. So if you recall here our card components, this is a card component. And as you can see, this says here documentation. If we would go ahead and say something and other stuff, and then we save, as you can see, this automatically updates now because this is using Vite under the surface. All of the hot module replacement works pretty nice. So with that in mind, we now have our website set up and we can start creating stuff with Astro. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we actually want to go ahead and clean up this entire file. So let's go ahead and delete this entire style tag. And then in here, let's just keep here the main. So we'll delete here inside of our tag, actually like that. And then we want to keep here the layout. Let's go ahead and delete here the card because we're not going to be using this component anymore. And then we can also go ahead and move here to our layout. And then let's go ahead and delete all of these global styles. And now, as you can see, this simply is a layout that adds in here inside of the body tag our contents. And then we have in here our head tag with simply the title and the meta information. So now if we navigate here back, as you can see, this has nothing. And that's because we want to actually, instead of using just the style tags, we want to go ahead and use TailwindCSS. So Tailwind, if you're not familiar, also let's go ahead and navigate here to its documentation. it is pretty much a way for us to use our class attributes inside of our HTML tags in order to style our website. Now, this essentially creates a very easy to use style system that is not really that opinionated. Now, usually what people go ahead and grab is something like Material UI, let's say for React. So usually a lot of people use something like this, or even Chakra UI. So this is also one of those tools that you can simply go ahead and use to style your application. But the thing is that this comes with a lot of styles, and it is very hard to make this not look exactly like, in this case, Material UI, or in the case of Chakra, to essentially to make it not look like the tool that you're using. But with TailwindCSS, this allows us to create sort of let's say an abstraction between pure CSS, so you don't have to write CSS from scratch, but you also have a lot of nice abstractions that allows you to essentially write code once and then be able to reuse it over and over again while keeping your styles exactly like you want them to be. So like I said, it is very easy for us to install this with Astro. So what we simply need to do is, as you can see, we have in here pnpm astro add tailwind, and this is just one command, and it is going to go ahead and set up everything for us. So now as you can see, I went ahead and stopped here our server, and then you can, again, if you're using yarn or npm, you can go ahead and choose here the command that you want. And then once you press enter, as you can see, the first thing that this asks is if we are sure that we want to install Astro.js Tailwind, which is the package that is going to essentially bridge between Astro and TailwindCSS, and then also the TailwindCSS package. So we're going to say yes, because we want to install both of these dependencies, since we still don't have them. And then as you can see, Astro will create a minimal Tailwind config file. So we also want that to happen, because usually, as you can see here, if we install, we need to go ahead and manually create this. But now this goes ahead and creates this automatically for us. And then we also want to make sure that we add in here, we import the Tailwind configuration from Astro.js Tailwind, and then we add it to our integration. Now, before pressing yes, let's just take a look and see if this has anything in here. So here, as you can see, for the moment, we only have in here export default defined config. Now what this is going to do, it is going to essentially add in here an integrations key, and then pass at this moment only one integration. If we go ahead and add multiple integrations later, then this is only going to append here this to our array. Now let's go ahead and close this file here, and now we can go ahead and press yes. So now, as you can see, we added the following integrations to our project. So now if we go ahead and run here pnpm actually run and dev, we now have our development server running. And now let's just make here an experiment. If we say, is Tailwind working? Then we go ahead and save this file. Now let's also take a look here. As you can see, this says in here that the content is going to be source, and then everything inside of the source folder that has the file type of Astro, HTML, JavaScript, and Markdown, Svelte, and a bunch of different stuff, also Vue. So what this essentially means is that Tailwind is going to be looking inside all of these files for classes for it to then compile them into a CSS file, so we can then see all of the results inside our browser. So now if we navigate here, this pretty much looks exactly like Tailwind. If you're familiar with it, this is more or less what it would look like. And now we can make a simple experiment by adding a class of text for Excel, for example, and let's make the text blue just to make sure that this is working. So now, as you can see, the text is bigger than it was before, and it is blue. So this essentially means that we now have TailwindCSS working. And with this working, we can now move over to the next part, which is creating our header. So now let's go ahead and move here to our components folder. And then in here, we simply want to add an header.astro file. Now, because most of this header is going to actually be static, we don't want to be using at the moment React. Now, we'll be using React in just a moment for us to add a very simple drop down, but for the moment we actually don't need this. So we're going to be using again React only when we absolutely need to grab React for something that's interactive. Now we could also go ahead and build all of our components using React, but because this tutorial is not really about React, I'm going to simply focus on Astro, build everything that we need, that we actually can with Astro, and then when we need it, we're going to go ahead and grab it. So now with that in mind, let's go ahead and create in here a simple div tag, and we're going to go ahead and add a couple here of stuff. So let's say this is flex, then we'll center here our items, and then we'll justify this between. And now let's add in here, let's say a link, and then this is going to be, let's keep it like this. So let's say in here, this one is called asteroid, and then in here we want to add another div tag, and this one is going to also be flexed. Items are also going to be centered, and then we want to go ahead and space this, let's say 3.5, which is equivalent to so let's say it's 4, so it is 14 pixels between each one of them. And then we want to go ahead and add all of our links essentially inside of our header. So with that in mind, let's say that we have, for example, an about page, a blog page, and then a contact us page. Okay, so this one can be, for example, contact us, this one can be the blog, and then this one is the about. So now if we go ahead and move here to our layout, we can simply go ahead now and import this. Now the reason we are importing this inside of our layout is because we want to add this to each one of the layouts that we're going to be using, to each one of the pages that we're going to be using. Now in the future we could go ahead and do something like having particular layouts that are separated for each one of the type of posts or pages that we want, but for now, to keep this simple, we'll simply go ahead and add in here our header. So now as you can see, this is going to be automatically imported. And now if we navigate here back to our website, as you can see, we have in here asteroid, about, blog, and all of that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and also style this a bit so this looks nicer. So the text is going to be bigger. We're going to also make this blue. Let's say the font can be, for example, bold. And now this looks a bit better. Let's actually make this a 4. And then here, let's go ahead and make all of these the following. So let's say here the class is going to be the text usually, so by default is going to be gray 700. And then on hover, we want it to be blue 800. So now let's go ahead and copy all of these styles. And now this looks a bit better. Now we also want to make sure that we have here some kind of padding, because this is all, as you can see now, all stretching to the sides of the screen. So we want to add padding here X, and X essentially means that we want to add padding to the left and to the right. And let's say that we want, for example, an 8, and then the padding on the top and the bottom is going to be a 3.5. Let's just take a look. So I think this looks good enough. So now, as you can see, each time that we click here, we are taken here to a 404 page, because at the moment we still don't have any kind of page set up for the about page. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and set up our index page. So let's go ahead and navigate back to it, and let's make a couple of adjustments. So first of all, let's add in here a class that says MX Auto, and this is going to center all of this. And then we want to do the following. So we want to go ahead and do max with screen, and let's say that we want, for example, large. So now what this essentially means is that this is going to be the size of the screen up until it is of large size. So up until it is of 1024 pixels, and then this is going to stop stretching. So as you can see, this goes ahead and stretches. So if we had, let's say that we add in here, for example, a flex item and then justify between, and we have 2, this is going to be stretching up until the point that the size of the screen is, of the browser in this case, is large. Now we're essentially going to do this to be able to have a responsive site in a much simpler way. So we can now go ahead and delete all of this. And now let's say in here, welcome to Asteroid. Now let's also go ahead and make this one also bold, and then I'm going to simply go ahead and add in here a margin at the top. Let's make it a bit more, for example 24. I think this looks good. Now we can also go ahead and add in here, and actually we can simply add a p tag, and let's go ahead and generate some lorem ipsum. So we can now go ahead and let's say I only need something like this. So we can now go ahead, take a look here at this thing, and as you can see, it appears down here. So we can also add in here some margin at the top, and then let's go ahead, make this text gray at 800, actually a bit less. So this looks just good. So now let's also go ahead and on Unsplash add in here, let's go ahead and copy an image. So let's say that we want an asteroid. Do we have something like that? Or a meteor, let's say, or just something that has a sky in it. So now let's go ahead and download this image. Okay, so now that we have our image downloaded, let's go ahead and open here our project file, and then we can go ahead and navigate here, actually not here, to public, and then we can simply go ahead and drag that in here. So let's go ahead and do this, and now we have in here our hero image. So let's go ahead and rename this to hero, and now we have in here hero.jpg file. So now if we go ahead and add in here an image tag, if we go ahead and add here to the source hero.jpg, we should be able to see the image in here. So let's go ahead and move here, and as you can see, we now have our image. Now let's go ahead and also add a couple of classes here to our image. Let's make here the margin at the top of 4, actually a bit more, and then we want to add here rounded corners, and let's also add a bit of a shadow. So let's make it small, or actually you can make it large, I think. So as you can see, we have in here a very nice image with rounded corners, and then we also have a shadow. So actually let's just keep this at 4 because I think it actually looks better. And now we have in here our index page. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add a footer. Now if you look at this page, something is missing here, and that's because we yet don't have a footer. So let's go ahead and add a footer here, and we can go ahead and add also a div tag. And we want to do a couple of things. First of all, we want to make sure that, and actually this one doesn't need to be flexed. The only thing that we need to do is add a margin at the top of 24. Let's also make this background gray. And then let's add in here, first of all, a p tag that says copyright 2022 asteroid. And then in here, we actually want to have a flexed div with all of the items centered, and then a space between them of, let's say, 16, I think, no, this is actually 8 pixels between each one of them. And then in here, we simply want to add, let's say, privacy policy, and these pages we're actually not going to go ahead and create them, but just so privacy policy. All right, that's correct. And now let's just add in here terms and conditions, and then here also terms and conditions. And now we need to go ahead and import this. So let's go ahead and import it so we can start taking a look at exactly how it looks. So again, same thing, it automatically imports in here, so we then have access to it inside of our page. And as you can see, we have here our footer. So it adds a margin at the top, so we now also can take a look a bit better at here our shadow of our image. And now let's add a couple of things. First of all, we want to make sure that this is padding y we have 8. Then we also want to make sure, let's say, if this centers. So instead of that, let's simply go ahead and add in here justify center. So this way all of these centers, and now in here we can simply add text center. So now all of this is centered, and we could also add in here 2.5 to the top. And let's actually make this a bit larger. And now as you can see, we have here our footer. Let's also add in here, usually we also have in here our cookie policy, and we'll say in here also cookie policy. So now as you can see, we have in here our copyright footer. So let's also grab here symbol and replace this thing with this copyright symbol so it looks a bit better. So now as you can see, we have in here this, so just like that. So as you can see, copyright 2022 asteroid. Now this is not copywritten, obviously, so you can go ahead and use some of this stuff. Usually I'd say do not copy everything into your own project. That's kind of obvious, but with that in mind, let's go ahead and now continue. So we now have in here a pretty basic welcome page, and then we're going to later add a couple more stuff. But now the next thing that we want to do is we want to go ahead and create our posts. Now let's just take a look here at the TailwindCSS documentation, and let's just see exactly what it says about our post. So if we take a look here at Markdown and MDX, as you can see, we're simply going to be using Markdown files in order to create our posts essentially. So we're going to be having here inside of our blog page a couple of posts that are displayed, and then we also want to go ahead and display the 3 latest posts only here inside of our index page. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do in order to be able to have all of our posts indexed is we want to first of all go ahead and, instead of actually creating, let's just go ahead and delete all of this stuff in here. Actually, we can simply go ahead and delete this entire stuff. And we're going to be using this car.astro component. If you don't have it, if you went ahead and deleted it, you can go ahead and simply create a new one. But we'll essentially use this to add each one of the blog posts as a card where we're simply going to have the thumbnail, the title, and then a read more button. Now let's go ahead and add in here a fictitious, let's say, title. So we're going to call this one let's say my amazing blog post, and then we want to go ahead and replace here this p tag, and let's go back here and copy a bit of lorem ipsum, and we can paste this in here. Let's do it like this, and then we want to have in here an href tag, so let's say that this goes to post, amazing, post, and then read more. Now let's go ahead and make sure that we can see all of our progress when we're creating this. So we want to go ahead and create in here our blog.astro file, and then we want to go ahead and start by importing our layout. Let's add a title as blog, and then here inside of our layout let's add a card, and then let's make it free. Now we also want to make sure that this is a grid, so let's go ahead and create in here a grid, and then with 3 columns. Let's take a look exactly how this looks now. So if you navigate here to Astro, and for some reason this isn't actually styled the correct way, so let's just go ahead and restart our server. So again, pnpm run dev. Alright, so now this is correct. So usually if your Tailwind CSS styles are not working, you want to make sure that you restart your server just to ensure that all of this is working. And now with that in mind, let's go ahead and navigate here back to our card. And actually before that, let's go ahead and also make this one max with screen large, and then let's go ahead and center this. So now as you can see, we have here 3 different cards. And finally, let's also go ahead and add in here a gap of 16 pixels between each one of them. So now all of these things, so let's just go ahead and take a look here. As you can see, this now has here, so let's just take a look. So in here, this is going to have a gap between each one of them that is going to be automatically set here by the browser. Now with that in mind, let's go ahead again, and now we actually can go back to our card component and we can start by styling it. So let's say that we want to add in here rounded large, then we want to add a border, then we want to make sure that the border is gray, and let's say the border is going to be 200. So I think this looks good. Now let's go ahead and also add in here, let's say 3.5, and then we want to add padding here as 4, as 5. This looks a bit better. And now let's go ahead and style here our h2 tag, which is going to be a bit bigger text, or just large XL actually. And then we want to make sure that it's bold, and let's also make this one blue. Now let's go ahead and add here a bit of margin to the top, and this text is going to be text gray 800. Now we finally want to style here our read more card link actually. So let's also add in here margin to the top, and then the text is going to be blue 700. On hover is going to be, let's say, text blue 800, and then on hover we want to have an underline, and the underline to have a bit of offset. So now this looks just like this. And in order to make sure that the margin at the top works, let's also make this a block. And we can actually add a bit more, so this is a bit more separate from all of this content. So now as you can see, we have in here our title, some kind of description that we can then grab from our markdown files. And we finally want to add here at the top, we want to add some kind of thumbnail. So let's go ahead and import here an image, and for now let's simply, for example, use our hero image, which is JPEG. And then let's go ahead and create here a class also, and we'll add in here the aspect as video. So we essentially want all of these to have the same aspect ratio. So we're simply going to go ahead and add that. Now, in order to make sure that all of this looks good, let's go ahead and do the following. So we want to remove here this stuff from here. Let's also go ahead and add in here a new tag. And then we want to create a new div in here. Let's go ahead and copy this. I'm not really sure if this is going to work, but let's just take a look. Okay, so for now this seems correct. And now we want to go ahead and add in here, let's say, rounded at the top, also large. So now this looks a bit better. So as you can see, we have in here our title, our description, and we can actually go ahead and get rid of the description, or not, we can keep it actually. And now as you can see, we have in here my amazing blog post. Then we have in here this thing, and as a final step, let's also go ahead and ensure that we can click on the title in order to go ahead and navigate to our blog post. So this should work just like that. And now as you can see, we can go ahead and do that, but in this case we want to remove our underline. So as a final step, let's also go ahead and do this. So now as you can see, we have in here 3 different cards that we can go ahead and use to pass data in here that we're going to then go ahead and grab from Astro. Now let's go ahead and navigate here back to our Astro Markdown documentation. And then as you can see, we have in here down at the bottom some kind of guidance on exactly how to import Markdown. So as you can see, we have in here pages, post, and then grade post. So we can go ahead and import only one Markdown file, or we can go ahead and import multiple using the astro.glob function. So that's exactly what we're going to do in order to be able to fetch our posts. So now the next thing that we want to do is we want to add our posts here to our pages folder. So let's go ahead and create in here post. And then in here, let's say that we want to add my first post.md. And then let's go ahead. I'm also going to install in here Markdown. All right. So now we can go ahead and add in here our title, which is going to be my first post. And then the slug is going to be my first post. And now let's go ahead, copy a bit here of lorem ipsum, and we can actually keep this the same for each one of these files. So let's go ahead and duplicate this into my second post.md. So this one is the second. And now let's also go ahead and duplicate this into my third post.md. And now we have in here 3 different posts. So now let's go ahead and import here inside of our blog page. So let's navigate back here to our blog page, and we want to essentially pass our post data into this card right here. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to ensure that we have our props available. So we'll define them like this, equals astro.props. Then we also want to add in here an interface, and let's call this one props. So we can essentially have all the information that we need to pass into here our card. So we'll pass in here a title, then let's say a description. And then we also want to ensure that we have our href, so which is essentially the slug, plus our web path. And then we also need a couple of more stuff. Let's say the thumbnail, which is going to be a path to our thumbnail, where we need to essentially replace this with this. And I think this is pretty much it. So now if we go ahead and take a look here, as you can see, it says that we need to pass this stuff Now again, just like I said, this is not only helpful because we are going to get here an error message that says that we need to pass all of these properties to our component, but this is also very helpful because if I do something like this, so let's go ahead and restart here our LSP. I'm going to go ahead and grab here our title, description, href. So again, just like I said, we have in here all of this, but we also get to do something like this. So as you can see, we have here the information of exactly what we need to pass in here. So if I went ahead and passed in here, so again, not only does this tells me that I need to pass something here, but if I went ahead and pass in here a title, we also are reminded that we need to pass in the correct type of props. So in this case, we need a title, which is going to be a string. So if we try to go ahead and pass in here a number, this is going to go ahead and complain. Now with that in mind, let's just go ahead and do the following. Let's go ahead and just make this empty and say my amazing post. Then let's add an empty description. You can just type anything, and then we can go ahead and pass in here an href. Let's go ahead and say again post and then amazing post, and then we can finally go ahead and pass in here a thumbnail. Let's for example add in here also hero.jpg. Now let's go ahead and save this and copy and paste. And now if we go ahead and navigate back to our project, we should actually be able to see these changes. Let's just go ahead and restart our server. And actually this was kind of a dumb mistake, but this is not showing because as you can see, all of the deconstructed elements are unused. So we actually need to go ahead and replace all of this. So let's go ahead. The source is going to be the thumbnail. In here, we want to add our description. Here we want to add our, this one is going to be the href. We also want to add the href here. And we finally need to replace here our title with this. So now, as you can see, we have in here my amazing post, read more, and then here a description. Now, the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is, like I said, to go ahead and import all of our posts and then be able to display them. So in order to do that, as you can see, we have in here this thing. So we can simply go ahead and copy this. Okay, so now we simply need to go ahead and replace here this path. Now, because we are already here inside of our pages folder, so let's just take a look. We are already inside of this pages folder, so we simply need to go ahead and pass here the path that is going to allow us to access here our post folder. And then we want to access again all of the files that end in MD. Now, after we do that, we're simply going to have access here to our posts, and we can go ahead and, as you can see, we have here all of our posts, and we can go ahead and access them here. Now, we could go ahead and also use here this frontmatter, and that's exactly what we're going to do. So let's go ahead and define here an interface that we'll call frontmatter, and it is going to have a title. So let's just take a look here at a .md file. We're going to have a title and a slug. So let's go ahead and pass this in here. The title is going to be a string and the slug is also going to be a string. Now, the reason that we're going to go ahead and pass in here a slug is because we might want to have in here a post with a specific name, a particular name, but then we also want to ensure that we can have in here a custom slug so that we can have here some kind of order. So let's say that you make, for example, you add in here simply an ID, a unique identifier ID, or even just 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you add all of them in order to make sure that you know exactly what's happening here. And then you're able to add in here a custom slug that you can pass then to your posts. Now, with that in mind, let's go ahead and do the following. So we want to go ahead, also before I forget, we need to pass in here this front matter. So I'm simply going to go ahead and copy this. And now we want to go ahead and map. Then we want to grab each one of the posts. And then we want to pass a card in there. And now, as you can see, it says here the post is declared but never read, and that's because we want to go ahead and add in here post.frontmatter.title. Then the description is going to be, so let's go ahead and take a look here, because we essentially want to be able to grab the raw text. So let's see here if we have some kind of raw content. Okay, it returns the raw markdown document as a string, and a function that returns the markdown document compiled to an HTML string. Okay, so let's take a look, because what we essentially want to do is we want to grab the content and then go ahead and slice this. So let's just take a look and see if we are able to actually go ahead and do something like that. So let's say raw content, and then slice from 0, let's say, to 25. Let's just take a look and see if Astro allows us to do that. Okay, so it has reloaded. Now let's go ahead and take a look here. So as you can see, this is going to slice here our entire post and limit it to, and I think I made here some kind of mistake. Yeah, so this is going to be the first post. So what this essentially is going to do, it is going to limit it to 25 characters. Now we might actually want to go ahead and increase this. So let's go back here to our blog.astro file, and instead of 25, let's just test this and see how this looks. All right, and then let's also go ahead and do the following. So we can go ahead and do this, and then we want to add 3 dots. Or not, actually, let's go ahead and just keep it like this, because the 3 dots, it looks kind of weird. So we can just go ahead and do the following. So now we have in here our description, and finally we want to go ahead and pass here our href. So inside of here we actually want to do this, because we want to pass in here post, and then we want to say post.frontmatter.slug. Now the last thing that we actually need to go ahead and do is we want to go ahead and add here thumbnails, which I actually forgot. So let's go ahead and say this thumbnail is also going to be hero.jpg, and we can later go ahead and replace this. So we can actually go ahead and copy this entire line, and then let's look here for the first post. And now we can actually go ahead in here and add a thumbnail, which is going to be a string, and then we can replace this with post.frontmatter.thumbnail. So now if we navigate back here, as you can see, let's just to make sure that this is all working correctly, let's restart here our development server, and now as you can see we have in here our 3 posts. Now let's go ahead just to ensure that all of this is working correctly and navigate back to Unsplash. And let's grab in here a couple of photos. So let's say this one, and let's just look here for a laptop, for example. So we can grab this one looks good. And finally some type of nature, for example. All right, these 3 images look good enough for me. So now let's go ahead and open here our asteroid project. And then here, let's go ahead and move them in here. And finally, we want to move this one. So now this one is going to be my first post.jpg, my second post.jpg, and this one is going to be my third post.jpg. So now we can go ahead and navigate back here to our project, and this is going to have essentially the same thing as this. And this is my first post, and this is my second post. And finally, if we navigate back to our project, now we should be able to see here 3 different images, and this is actually going to go ahead and shrink this. So let's just take a look here. For example, image HTML stretch, because this is stretching. Okay, stretch. Okay, fill. Yeah, we want to essentially fill. So yeah, it's the object fit property. I actually forgot about it. So let's go ahead and add in here object fit. So let's see exactly where this goes. Okay, so this is a CSS property. So we need to object fill. All right. So now this should look good. It doesn't at the moment yet, so let's just take a look and see exactly why this is happening. Okay, so probably want, instead of a fill, we want a cover actually. Yeah, that's exactly right. So now, as you can see, this now looks good, is with the correct aspect ratio, and we now see in here all of our posts that we have at the moment. So now with this in mind, we can actually go ahead and add the following. So let's navigate here to our blog page, and then in here we want to add blog, and inside of our index we want to go ahead, copy this actually, and let's just paste this in here, because this way we have the same style as before. And also let's go ahead and add in here a main tag. Let's go ahead and also close it. And now we can go ahead and copy this thing right over here. All right. So now this looks a bit better. And because we added our screen size in there, we can go ahead and delete it here. And now we can add some type of margin to the top. Let's say 12. This will probably look good. And now here to the bottom, let's also add some kind of description, which could be like your blog description or your website description or something like that. So we'll just keep it the same as previously. So now, as you can see, this looks good, and we have in here our index page with our footer, and then we have in here our blog with all of our blog posts. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we essentially want to be able to display this exact same thing, but on our index page. So that's exactly what we're going to go ahead and do. So let's go ahead and copy here all of this stuff. So we actually want, let's say, go, and we were already inside of this file. So let's just go ahead, copy all of this stuff. We also want all of this part of our code. And now we have access here to our post and our card, and we can simply go ahead and copy this here. Now we want to ensure that we add this here to the bottom. And now if we navigate here back to our index page, we have our latest post. Now this still looks a bit weird, so let's go ahead and copy this. And then we want to change this to our latest posts. And let's also go ahead and change this to an H2 tag. We're also going to make sure that this is a bit smaller. All right, so a free Excel looks good. And then let's go ahead and reduce here by a bit. Let's say here 5. And then we can just leave it as is. So now we have in here welcome to Asteroid, and then we have down here our latest post. So now if we go ahead and click here, as you can see, we have access here to our post. Now the reason for that is because since we have in here a post folder and then we have in here each one of our posts, we already have access to it inside of our Astro development server. Now as you can see, if we navigate back here to our post, one of the things that you might notice is that we still only have our content and it is not styled. It doesn't have any styles by default, and that's what we want to do now. We want to go ahead and add a layout that is going to essentially allow us to use inside here each one of our posts, and then we simply need to go ahead, apply this layout, and this is going to be automatically applied here to our content, and it is also going to go ahead and use here the title, the slug, and our thumbnail. Okay, so to understand exactly how this works, let's go ahead and navigate here back to our Astro documentation. And as you can see, it says here front matter layout. So Astro provides Markdown and MDX pages with a special front matter property for layout that defines the relative path to an Astro layout component. So what we essentially want to do is we want to go ahead and create and name it similarly to what they named it, just to keep it simple. And then we want to create in here a file with all of this content. So now instead of having all of this content, and I'm actually going to go ahead and copy this, so we can go ahead, delete this part, and we just need to keep the following. We need to keep everything that's inside of the body, and then we want to replace here this HTML tag with our already existing base layout. So this is called base layout, but so let's actually go ahead and rename this to post layout, because this actually makes more sense. And now we want to pass in here the layout, and the title is going to be frontmatter.title. Now similarly to the case before, let's go ahead and add in here, copy this, and then we want to have in here our props, and then this one is going to be as props. And actually we need to add in here front matter, a key, and then we pass this in here. And inside of this post layout we want to do the following. So we first of all want to ensure that we only have in here our title, and then we also don't want to have in here our date. And finally, as you can see, it says in here render HTML will be passed into the default slot. Now what this essentially means is that the HTML that we're going to be getting here from our Markdown file, so the HTML that is going to be generated here from this Markdown file, is going to be passed in here with the slot tag, again similarly to what happens inside of an Astro component, or even something like, let's say, Svelte or Vue. Now we can go ahead and delete this. And now the next thing that we want to do is, like I said, we need to add in here a layout property here to our Markdown file. And then we want to set this layout as, so we want to exit this folder into the pages folder. And then we want to go back here into the source folder. And now in here we'll have, as you can see, layouts instead of layout actually, and then post layout.astro. And now if we navigate here back to our website, instead of being here the second post, my first post, as you can see, it now has here our header, our footer, which are inside of our layout. So let's think about it as a base layout, and then our post layout passes in here all of our content. Now we can go ahead and make sure that we have this layout set up for all of our posts. Finally, second post, MD. And now if we navigate here to any one of these posts, as you can see, we now have this layout. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to ensure that this content is sort of it's first of all centered. So let's go ahead and add in class, add a class in here. Let's make this one medium, and then let's add in here margin auto at the right and left, and now this is centered. And actually we can add this outside of both the h1 tag and the content. And now let's go ahead and style here our h1 tag. So this one could be, for example, text for Excel, text blue again 700. Let's make this one also bold. So this looks good. And then we want to actually add in here another class, and let's make this one, for example, let's say margin at the top of 8, or actually less than this, 4. And now we want to go ahead and add in here an image. So the image, the source is going to be the thumbnail. Okay, so export statements in Astro files do not have access to local variable. Okay, so we essentially want to use frontmatter.thumbnail, not just the thumbnail. And we again want to ensure that we have the expect as video. Now you could go ahead and pass in here a custom expect. Now in this case it is 16 by 9. We could say, for example, 12 by 9, for example. But video for me, in my opinion, looks good. So this looks good like this. And again, let's ensure that the object is cover, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, that's exactly right. So now we have in here our thumbnail. So let's go ahead and further style it a bit more. So we want to add rounded large. Let's just, like in the previous case with the hero image, let's, for example, add in here a shadow that's also large. And then let's add a margin to the top, so it is a bit spaced from this. And then let's go ahead and ensure that this is not so close to our header. So let's say 24. That's actually a bit too much. Let's say a 16 and see if this works out. Perfect. So now this looks good. Now I think that we can actually go ahead and also center this. Okay, and now let's go ahead and do the following. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to ensure that we have let's say we want to have this content here separated by paragraphs. Now the thing that you might be wondering right now is exactly how we can style this, since we do not have access to this content inside our slot. And that's because we essentially don't have access to each one of the individual div tags, and because of that we'll be using, in this case, our style tag. So we can go ahead and say in here p, and we go ahead and apply. Now if you don't know what this means, let's just take a look here. TailwindCSS apply, and if we search in here for apply, extracting classes with apply. So now what this essentially means is that we can go ahead and apply CSS, Tailwind CSS classes to our here CSS. So we can essentially scope this to the button primary, so on and so on. So what I essentially mean by this is that we can go ahead and to each one of these p tags right over here. So if we inspect this, we have a bunch of different p tags, but you might notice that they are very, very close to each other, and we want to go ahead and space them out. So let's say in here padding, or actually margin at the top, let's add 4, and this will not work because we need to actually make this global. And now as you can see here inside of our post, each one of these p tags is going to be added a margin of 4 at the top. So let's just experiment a bit more with this. 8 is probably too much. I think that 4 is just enough. So now we also can go ahead and add in here text. Let's make it gray 800. It's still good enough for reading and it looks a bit better. And now as you can see, we have in here our post. Now let's go ahead and do a couple extra things. We can actually define this as 6 at the top, and let's go ahead and add in here an offer to our post. So let's say an offer is going to be web dev fuel, and then a date which is going to be, let's say, October 08 2022. Let's just check in here, blog post, date, structure, maybe something like that. Okay, so let's do it like that, October. All right, so to make sure that this is usually what happens inside of other blog posts. And now we can go ahead and simply paste this in here, and since this is not really that important, we can just keep the same offer and the same date. Now the thing is that we have in here the offer and the date, but we don't actually need to display it all over the place. So as you can see here on our blog, we can just have this data passed in here, but then when we click in here, we can access different type of different kind of data. So different data that we're going to have extracted here from our front matter. So with that in mind, if we go ahead again to the post layout, we want to ensure that we have in here our offer and our date. So let's go ahead and do something like this. We can go ahead and add in here a div tag. Let's flex this one, then we want to center it and also add some space between it. And then we want to have two different div tags again in here. And this is going to be exactly the same thing, but this one is only going to be of space 1 between them. And we want to add in here a p tag with front matter dot. Now we added in there the string, the offer, which is a string, and then we also had the date, which is also going to be a string. So we first of all want to add the offer, and then let's go ahead and add in here our date. And now as you can see, we have here our offer and date. Now let's go ahead and also take a look here, TailwindCSS vertical line. All right, so if we add in here, let's say like this. Okay, so instead of doing this, let's go ahead and do the following. So instead of having here space x2, let's just go ahead and say px2 and then also px2, and then we can say in here divide x. So now it should look good. Yeah, exactly. So now let's just take a look and see exactly why this is so high there up at the top. Okay, and that's because we have here the p tag, and the p tag in here, as you can see, is going to apply here the margin at the top of 4, and we don't want that to happen. So let's add in here content. So we'll add in here a content class, and then we'll say inside of the content class the p is going to have a margin at the top, but here as you can see it doesn't have anymore, and we now have in here a very nice line that is going to divide this. Now let's just take a look and see if we can actually style the line in any sort of way. Okay, let's just take a look here, because this line looks a bit too it needs to be a bit darker for us to actually see it correctly. So let's just take a look, divide. All right, that's exactly right. So we can do a gray 500, let's say. That's actually too much. 300, I think it looks good. Let's just compare it to what it looked previously. All right, so it looks good just like that. And now we need to go ahead and add in here the text as small. We want to do the exact same thing in here. And finally we added in here, as you can see, a flex, and we're going to go ahead and center the items on the axis, and we want to add in here two different icons. So this one is going to be the offer, so we can simply go ahead and navigate here to hero icons. Now this is also, as you can see in here, created by the same people that created Tailwind CSS, and these icons look very good, so we can just copy these SVG with an user. Let's make this one a 4. And now if we take a look in here, as you can see, we have there an icon. And finally, we want to also, let's say, a clock or calendar, it's probably better. And if you go ahead and copy this, and now paste this in here and replace also with 4, we can actually do a 5 in here. We now go ahead and navigate back here, and as you can see, we have in here our offer and our date. So now let's go ahead and add a margin to the top here of 4, and not to this one, actually to this one. And finally, let's go ahead and justify this on the center, so this looks just like that. So now this looks good. We have in here our offer, our blog post title. Let's go ahead and add a bit more, let's say 5. Okay, just like that. And also here on our thumbnail, let's say, for example, an 8 or 7, probably, maybe better. All right, so now this looks good. So now we have here our post title, our offer, and our post date. So at this point, we are now able to again create new blog post, new posts. And then if we simply go ahead and, just to reiterate, if we simply go ahead and import this layout here into our post, we are able to essentially create a new layout, and this is going to grab all of this data from here, and it is going to apply it here to our post. So if we click here, we now have access to this post, and as you can see, it is on post/my second post. And finally, just to ensure that this works correctly, let's go over something else. So we want to go ahead and let's go ahead, for example, and open this one. Let's duplicate it into my 4th post.md, and I think 4th is spelled like that. That's correct. Okay, so now here, this is my 4th post, so let's replace this with 4th, and the title is going to be my 4th post. So now if we go back here to our blog, we are going to go ahead and see here my 3rd post, and the 4th post doesn't have any type of thumbnail, and that's because we actually don't have any thumbnail for it. So let's just keep it like that. So as you can see, we have in here my 1st post, my 4th post, and my 2nd post. So now one of the first things that you might be able to see is that we actually have in here my 1st post, my 4th post, my 2nd post, and then my 3rd post. Now, what we first of all want to do is we want to order this in a descending order. So we want to first of all see my 4th post, then we want to see my 3rd post, then so on and so on. So we're going to go ahead and do the following. So the 4th post, which is going to be the last one, let's say this is the 30th of October. The 3rd post is going to be, let's say, on the 25th. The 2nd post is going to be on the 20th, and then finally the 1st post is going to, let's say, let's just leave it at 8th of October. So now if we go ahead and save this, now as you can see, it is still the same, and that's because we want to go ahead and essentially extract this data, but we want to ensure that all of this is set up correctly. Okay, so now what we essentially want to do is we want to go ahead and, before we map over all of our posts, we want to go ahead and sort them. So for that, we're going to be using here our sort method, and this is a method that comes with included with JavaScript each time that we have an array. And as you can see, we simply need to pass a current and a previous value, and then we go ahead, compare them, and then this is going to go ahead and sort this for us. So now let's go ahead and pass in here. First of all, again, we need to pass post.sort.map, and then in here we need to pass the A and the B, which is going to simply be here a post. So we'll have access here to frontmatter and then our date. And actually, before we go ahead and do that, let's go ahead and pass in here our date. And now if date.parse is minus date.parse, so we're going to compare two different dates, then this is going to essentially compare multiple. So we're going to parse this into a number, our date, and then this is going to compare both of those numbers for each one of the iterations of this array, and then this is going to go ahead and sort before we go ahead and map. Now the first thing that we want to do is we want to add in here the first the post A, so which is going to be the current one or the previous one in this case, and then the B, which is going to be the one that we want to compare it to. And then we're going to go ahead and pass this in here, and now as you can see we have first post, second post, third post, and finally fourth post. Now because we want to ensure that this is going to be descending, we want to simply replace this. So we want to compare the B to the A, and now as you can see we have fourth post, third post, second post, and first post. Now in this page, like I said before, it is okay for us to have all of our posts. We could go ahead and do some kind of pagination, but again this is besides the point of this guide. I can go ahead and in a future video do something like that, but in this case, in the case of our index page, we don't have to have all of this. We don't want to have all of this. So let's go ahead and navigate here to our index page, and first of all let's go ahead and copy this sort thing right over here. Then let's go ahead and paste this, and now as you can see it complains here that it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and add our date in here. And now this is also going to go ahead and sort all of our posts. And finally we want to do the following. We want to ensure that we only see the 3 posts that we have here. So in order to do that, let's add a method in here after our sort. So first of all we want to sort over all of our iterations, and only then we want to slice. So we want to essentially slice. So we want to take the indexes between 0 and 2, and actually it's not between 0 and 2, it's between 0 and 3, I think. Yeah, exactly. So now we have my fourth post, my third post, and my second post, which means that we have the last 3 posts here displaying on our index page. Okay, so for now this is it. In the next video I'm going to show you exactly how you can create here a drop-down menu when we hover over our blog item, and then I'm also going to show you how to create a contact us page that is going to have front-end validation, again using React, and it is going to be very nice because we can essentially have all of that interactivity be hydrated in islands instead of having to hydrate the entire page. So for now, in order to have a working Astro website, this is everything that we need. And again, we have an index page, we have here our hero section, then we have our latest posts, and if we click here again we have our blog, and finally we have our latest posts, and then we can see here our post content. So if you enjoyed this video, leave a like below, let me know in the comments what else you want to see from this channel in terms of Astro or other type of web development content, and also subscribe to get notified of future content.